Okay, so just to cover the things that we did last time, every time we come in, we go to Preferences, you go to Files, and you tell Cinema which folder you're working on. So make sure every single time you come in, that's what you're doing. Also under Cameras Navigation, make sure you set this to Object Mode, because that's another thing that you want to make sure is set up so that as you rotate around your stuff, you're actually rotating around your stuff. Okay, so our goal today is that we want to set up some lights inside the scene, we want to set up an animated camera, and then we want to render this out and actually make it into a movie that we can show off. So I'm going to just move this thing over here. Why aren't you moving, Cube Monitor? That's my picture frame. Oh, because it's locked. Right. Unlock the bookcase, click the bookcase, scoot it over. Gorgeous. All right. So with lighting, there's several different kinds of lights. So under this little light swatch here, these are all different kinds of lights that you can add to your stuff. Version 19 has an additional light in there. If you played with Cinema before, this PBR light wasn't there. That's a new addition to version 19. All of these have a specific use. We're going to be very focused on just 3 lights for this setup. So we're going to do a regular light, spotlight, and area light. So I'll show you what each one of these does and where we would use them. Yes, sir.
Is this stuff we can do at the end, or are we allowed to still work on objects in our room?
You're still allowed to work on objects in your room and add stuff after.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can do these in any order, right? So the way that we set this up is we kind of modeled things and then we textured stuff. We could have gone through and modeled everything in the room, then come back and textured it all, then come back and lit it. Then we could even add more stuff to the room or whatever. Okay, so you can always add more stuff. Keep in mind this isn't a portfolio piece. It's really just kind of understanding the basics of cinema. So let's start off with the first one, which is just a light. So you can think of a light just like a light bulb. It starts in this very center and then it just emits outward. Okay. Now you're not going to be able to see any of the changes on this to the extent that they are actually in the scene until we actually hit that Shift R button, which will render it out and show us what it looks like. So add a regular light, just the light to your scene, and then hit Shift R, and then you can see what it's going to look like. Yes, sir. The same way you would move anything, you just go to the Move tool and move the light.
Yeah, I'm going.
So you hit E, right? And you can move it.
And where are you moving yours?
It doesn't matter. Just for now, just move it somewhere so you can see, roughly, the position of it in the room. So one thing we'll notice is that we don't actually see a light. Right? So when I hit Shift R, there's no actual light bulb floating in space. That's something that we'd have to turn on to tell it that we want to do that. What else do you notice about it?
The shadows and change.
Yep. So there's no shadows in the scene. Okay. So everything that we do inside of any 3D software, we have to tell it what we want. So for this specific light, we want shadows. So if we go to the attributes for the light, you'll see there's 50 tabs. Not really, but seems like it. And even on the shadows themselves, so there's a whole selection of different kinds of lights we can use. There's 3 different kinds of shadows, or 4 different kinds of shadows. 3 different kinds of shadows that we could use inside here too. So just so you can see, go to the first one, which says Shadow Maps Soft. And then hit Shift R again. Okay, so we added Shadow Map Soft, we hit Shift R, and now we can see actual shadows. So a couple things we look for before we even really pay attention to the kind of shadows we have really, is making sure that all of our stuff is touching. So if my desk or chair or whatever was just off the ground just a little bit, Come on. There you go. So I moved mine off the ground just a little bit. You would definitely see that it's floating in space. Okay, so that's maybe something that you don't see normally, but now that I have a light in there and I have shadows, you're definitely seeing some of that stuff. So I'm going to undo that so he's not floating. There we go. All right, so that's shadows soft. Going to scale this down. If you have multiple screens, typically what I do is I throw my render view onto one screen, and that way I can change stuff and still have that up the entire time. All right, so now let's look at ray traced hard shadows. So we'll switch it to the next shadow one and render that out. Okay, so those look like, just like it says, ray traced hard shadows. And then we switch to area and render that out.
Wait, where did you go, sir? What did you do next?
On the light itself, we're just changing the shadow type. Okay, so those are 3 different ways that we can calculate what the shadows look like. And depending on what kind of objects you have, what kind of shadows you may want in your scene, you may use those 3 different things. Now, each of these have their own options too. So when I'm switching between shadow, ray trace, and area, I have this switch there, but I also have a shadow tab at the top. And if I change it here, it changes the same way. So if I choose shadow map soft, I get shadow map soft options. If I choose ray trace hard, I get ray trace hard options. If I choose area, I get area options. Okay? So for this scene, we're going to use shadow map soft. Okay? Now eventually we'll find out that that isn't the best one to always use, because what happens with these is that they're basically soft throughout the entire thing. If we look at the shadow here, this is the same softness as this. What should happen is it should be pretty crisp here and then soften up, because what happens is shadows kind of like spread out a little bit. Yes, sir?
I have the shadow map soft on mine, but this is what it looks like in rendering.
Appropriate spots. Okay, so the soft one is okay for our scene. Now, the way that the soft works is, imagine that we have a picture of a shadow that we're stretching out over our entire area. That picture is 250 pixels by 250 pixels. That's what this number right here means. So if I take this up to, you can leave yours at 250. If I take this up to 2000 and I render this, you'll see that my shadow map hard or soft is now hard, because that texture is now crisper because I have more pixels in there and I can save more information. So with this one at the 250 by 250, most likely you're going to be pretty good leaving it just like that. Okay? Eventually we'll get into playing with shadows so they look 10 times better. All right, so that is a point light. Now this could be also something that you would use. Let's say that I created a lamp in the corner. So just imagine that that's just the lamp head. Oops, like that. And I'm going to get rid of the cap. Okay, so now we can see inside it. And I'm just going to put this inside, or just like a lamp, so it'll be just like that. There we go. All right, so now what do you think is going to happen when I do this? Yep, it's going to come out from the cone. Now because we have this inside the cone, it's going to shoot out the top. No other light will be in the scene except for what is inside there. So when I hit render, that's what I get, okay? Because it's just shooting straight up out of the cone. Eventually we'll play with adding other properties to our lights. Like let's say that I took that cone and I gave it a glass texture. You'll see that now I've added the glass, so now the light can actually get through the glass and get into the scene, okay? But look at how disgusting these shadows look on here, right? So my settings really need to be cranked up in order for that to look nice. Another thing to pay attention to is that we don't get bounced light, right? In the real world, a light hits a wall, it bounces off that wall and then hits something else. We don't get that inside here by default. So in this one, we're just going to kind of fake that bounce light with some other lights. All right, so just so I don't get confused, I'm going to uncheck this light. That way I'm back to my default setup. Okay, because now I want to look at a spotlight. And a spotlight is something you probably, of all the lights really, you're more familiar with what a spotlight would look like. So this is exactly what you're seeing, a spotlight. So it starts at one point and there's a cone that directs it outward. Now the way this is different than a point light is that the point light or the regular light goes in all directions. This one really goes in just the one direction that we're specifying. So if we make this, let's say this big, we can really cover a large area. And just like our other stuff, you can see there's little controllers on these tips. This also has shadows, so just like before, we have shadow map soft, area, and ray traced. Now these ones here are going to be a bit different. If I go into this, let's say, and I give it a little rotate, and I render this out, you'll see that the shadows are, when I switch them to area, we're getting something different than we were getting before with a point light. Because a point is just a dot, it doesn't have an actual area to be an area light. So that's what it does. It allows us to have some sort of surface in order for that to work. Okay, so if I make this bigger, then that's going to make this area light part bigger. And what it should do is spread out these shadows more. And that's exactly what it's doing. You can see here, right at the leg of this, it's pretty crisp, and then it's feathering out more. Okay? So you can kind of see, too, the purpose of something like this is that we're able to create these kind of really moody or direct light type of situations. Okay, so I'm going to uncheck that one. And then the final light that we'll look at is an area light. And you can consider an area light to be something more of like a fluorescent light or just like a panel light. Okay, wherever that box is, it's going to come off of this box and light up the room. In some softwares, it'll only light up the direction it's facing. In Cinema, it lights up both directions, so it lights up the left side and the right side, but you can see what happens here too is it doesn't light up the middle, so you get this really weird line because there's no light in that middle area. So typically what we would do is, let's say that I have my computer screen, and I want it to look like Monkey was on the computer screen, actually like the computer screen was lighting up the room. So I can use this area light as a way to help light up the room a bit. And this is why we typically don't want to rotate things around until we're ready for it, because this would be a lot easier if that screen was already over there. Yes, sir.
What?
Did you have your hand up?
Oh, I was just checking.
Okay. All right, there we go. Okay, so now it's over here. I could render this. Oops. Let me pull it out a little bit more. I might be just too close to it. All right, so now it's lighting it up, but I want to give it some color. So if I go to that light, I can go to the details of it, or the general of it, and give it a color. So just for fun, I'll give it blue. Okay. There we go. So it's overkill, but it's doing it. Okay. And then there's no shadow on here, so I'll put an area light shadow. It changes the color of the light.
Oh.
Okay, so typically, I didn't mean to delete that. Where did my stuff go? 0. Typically, you'll use it for stuff like I want the TV screen to be lighting up the room a little bit, so you can put it over there. You can also use it for stuff like this. For a room like this where we're just kind of lighting up this section, I'm going to actually put it over here. So it's outside the room. And it's not blue because that's like a weird color for this light to be. So you can see just adding that one light, that one area light outside the room, I'm able to get some pretty decent shadows and lighting inside the scene. Okay? So there's a little shadow around the bookcase, a little shadow around this area. So make an area light, if you already haven't, and put it outside your room like that. So it's shining into the room.
Do you want us to delete the original light, like the regular one?
You don't need to delete those. As long as they're unchecked, they won't render. So if you're not going to use them, then you can delete them.
How do we set up this area light?
You just make the light, so you go to area light here. Okay, so under the light, and then you just click on it, and then you just move it and grab these little dots until it's scaled up.
And you don't want us to have it like colored, right?
You can if you color a light, and this is true for anything, unless it's like a specific, like this is definitely a red light that I want to show off. Typically, you just want to give it a tint. So if I'm going to go, like I want my room to have a bluish hue to it, I wouldn't go like that. That's too much. I would go like this and give it just a hint of blue.
Do you want us to like rotate it after we get it outside the room?
You just want to get it outside the room so it's pointing inward. So that flat plane of it is pointing towards inside the room. I think I'm actually going to go with like an orangey color here. All right, now you can use your picture viewer too as a way to kind of filter or to see before and afters. So if I'm trying to figure out like what looks good, what color should I put my light at? Here it is at the default color, and then here it is with a little bit of a blue tint. Here it is with too much yellow, and here it is with probably an appropriate amount of yellow. So you can use these to kind of I use the arrow keys, just cycling through to see what the pictures look like before and after. And if you're not sure, go crazy. Like if I take this really far yellow and then I render it out, I know that's too yellow. It's really weird. And then I can kind of dial it back some. Now you could also adjust some of these properties inside of, let's say, Photoshop or After Effects. If I wanted my entire scene to have a bluish tint, I could add a tint inside of After Effects to tint everything blue, or a color adjustment. Okay, so the area light is our main light to help light up the entire scene. Now for the other stuff, you may have other lights inside your scene that you want to be able to show off. So I may have my lamp in the corner that I want to light up. So I'm going to turn that light back on. I may have this area I want to kind of focus on that computer area. So I'm going to turn that light on as well. Okay, now when you start adding lights and lights and lights, what's going to happen is they're going to start competing for what's inside the scene. So this light here that's on the computer desk, this looks pretty natural and I don't see anything like crazy horrible about it. This one that's in the lamp, I'm getting a lot of hard shadows and I'm getting just a huge bright area back here. So I'm going to take the one that's in the back, which is that one, and I'm going to take its intensity down. The intensity is basically the brightness of that light. So if we want the light to be dimmer, then we would do that. So I still want something back there. All right, that seems appropriate. You should have at least 2 lights inside your scene, just because you may not hit everything with the one light. But you can have more if you would like to.
I'm just playing around with these different lights.
Also keep in mind that even though the intensity on some of the lights would say something like 100%, they go above that. So I can take a light, oops, wrong one, and go, let's say 300%, 400%, whatever it is. Okay, that's way too bright for that area, but that's what it is. So let me take that down to like 150. There we go. So we have our main light in the room, and then we have a supporting light in there just to kind of help give us some accent and help draw our eye. If our lighting is too flat, you really lose out on what people are supposed to be looking at. Your lighting and your composition of your cameras and everything are really meant to be there as a way to show people, like, this is what you should be focusing on. This is what you should be focusing on. Sweet. All right, so you can play with your lights later too and tweak them. So now let's add a camera. So the light button was right here at the top. Where do you think the camera button is?
Next to the light button.
Yep. So if you click and hold on it, you'll see, just like everything else inside the world of cinema, there's a million different options. We're going to stick with the regular camera, which is right at the top. Okay, so you can click on camera. Yep. Now if I just were to click that button, that's the default. So it would just create a camera either way. So click that or go to that. So it creates a camera. Now the whole time that we've been working, we've been spinning around inside a camera already. So it's not like we haven't used a camera before. It's just there wasn't an option that said camera over here. So on this camera, I want to double click it and call this render cam. If you have 15 cameras in your scene, you want to know what they're called. This is my zooming in. This is my close-up. This is my desk shot, whatever it is. So if I want to look through this camera, over here there's a little target. You click on that.
Where's this target?
Right under tags, the word tags, there's like a little black thing. You just click it. Okay?
And what does that allow you to do?
That means that we're actually in the camera now. Okay? So because we just created the camera, it automatically drops it exactly where we're at. Okay? So leave yours where it is, but I'm going to show you. If I click off of this and I zoom out, there's the camera. Okay? When I click on this button, it takes me into that camera. So now I'm actually looking through it. If I don't have this as white, I'm not moving around that camera. All right, so what we want to do is we want to see what this is looking like. So on the camera itself, where is that button at? I want grid. Where's my thing at? Object, yes. You can't find what? You should be in it. Let me see. Panel, parameter, filter, options. All right, whatever. All right, so just like everything, there's like a million options for all this stuff. So for this specific camera here under object, one thing we want to play with is this focal length. So just like a regular camera, we have focal length. So if I go to a low focal length, this is going to give me a very like fisheye kind of view to my room. Okay, and as I try to like zoom in, it's going to obviously look weird. If I go bigger, so I go like, it was defaulted to 35, I go to 100, this is going to flatten out the entire room. Okay, cinema has a weird thing where if I'm selected on the camera, I can't zoom in and out. I don't know why that is. Okay, so I can't like zoom in and out, but I can spin around and I can track, but I can't zoom. It's weird. So by default, leave yours at 35, but just know that you could always come back into here and make it, let's say, 50 or whatever, okay? So unselect your camera, so just click off into nothing, so you have nothing selected. And then what we want to do is we want to set this up so that we can see, we can start off the rendering or the animation with what we want to see on that very first frame, okay? So the start of our animation, we want to show off, let's say, my computer screen, okay? So I'm going to put my camera about like this. Was that?
How do we click off so we can?
You just don't, like I'm clicked on the camera right here. You just click into nothing. So click on nothing, nothing. Okay. So I moved the camera to where I want to start my animation. If I hit Shift R, I want to also keep in mind the framing of my view. So if I look at this, okay. So if I look at this, you see how I have this line right here, and I have this green thing here. That matches pretty well with what I'm seeing inside my rendering. If I drag this all the way over like that, and then I hit the render again, it doesn't change.
Oh, it doesn't.
It doesn't change, right? Because all I've done is change my panels. It shouldn't change my other stuff, okay? So one of the things that we have to pay attention to, and it's very difficult to see, you can kind of see it better here as I'm dragging. Do you see those like tinted bars on the top and the bottom? Okay, those are what is outside of our rendering. The stuff between that, that's what's inside the rendering. So if you set this up perfect, like mine was a second ago, like that, then what you see inside your viewport is what you're going to see. Now if I bring it over like this, or I go this far, it'll give me different tinted ones. But you just want to keep in mind that whatever's inside those tinted areas doesn't render, okay? So right now I have bookcases in this area. When I render this, my bookcase will not be my rendering, okay? So that's important because we don't want to show stuff until we're ready to show it. And some things we just never want to show. We never want to show, when we're in 3D, something like this. Like I wouldn't want to zoom into my room like this because then it takes the illusion away of this is a real room, even though it's far from being a real room. It just looks really, that looks disgusting. So we want to be inside the room, and we want to make sure that we're framed enough so that we're not catching a corner like this. See how that's like the edge of it? We don't want that. We want to be inside the room. Okay? So let me just adjust this back to where it was. That's good. All right, so let's say that's where I want my first frame to be. We can come back and adjust it. We can delete keyframes. We can add keyframes, whatever. Our animation, let's go to our InDesign file. Or you probably have your sheets with you, your assignment submission forms. What was the length of time that we were rendering this out at? I believe it was 5 seconds. So if we're doing 5 seconds, which I believe is what we have it set up to, and we have how many frames per second? 30, okay? So how many frames is that we need?
150.
Yep. Okay. So if we have 5 seconds and we have 30 frames in each second, 5 times 30 is 150. So we need to go down here to where this says 90F, that's 90 frames, and we need to set that to 150. And then you have to drag the little bar arrow over to the right so that it has 150 frames. So we change this to 150.
So what are we doing right now? We're changing that to 150.
Yep,
And then stretching the bar to the right so it equals
What bar to the right?
this one. You see that bar there?
Yeah.
Yep. You're just grabbing that arrow and dragging it over. So this is similar to like After Effects. If you have a work area, that's what that bar is. Like, what are you working on? You can focus on just those frames. We want to work on the entire thing, so we're going to stretch out the entire thing. Okay? So in our little time slider here, I want to make sure that my time slider is at 0. So I'm going to move my time slider all the way to 0. Okay, and it doesn't matter where you click in here, it'll automatically just jump, and then you can slide it to 0. Okay, so I can verify it by this number is 0 frames. This is the start. This is what I want it to look like when it first starts my animation. So I click on my render camera, I click on coordinates, and then all I have to do is click and drag down these dots. Okay, position and rotation for a camera is typically all you're going to animate unless you get fancy with it. When I'm clicking and dragging, that sets keyframes for each of those. Okay, so I went to frame 0, my camera is where I want it to be, I clicked on the camera, I went to coordinates, and I set keyframes for those. Okay, and then what that does is it says this is the first frame, this is what your stuff is going to look like at the very beginning of this. Good? Okay. So now I'm going to go to frame 150. I want to zoom out of my camera, so I have to deselect it. And then I'm just going to move my camera over to something else inside my room. Cinema is not an auto key program, so After Effects, you set up your thing to say, I want to set keyframes, and it automatically sets keyframes for you every time you change it. Cinema does not do that. So every time we change something we want to set keyframes, I have to re-click the camera and then highlight those buttons again. And then I should be able to hit play and see that animation sweeping from one side to the other. Things we never want to do. For instance, my camera move here is nice and smooth. It starts and it ends. You may have a million things inside your scene and you may be super excited about showing off each one of them. That's not what we're doing here. I'm going to go turn my camera off. So I'm going to set up a bad camera and show you what a bad camera would look like. All right, so this is an example of a bad camera, because what we're doing is it's bouncing around way too much. We have 5 seconds, and this is not playing back at, exactly real time. So it's going from this bookcase, it's going back to this, and then it's going back to the bookcases again. And that's like way too much movement for our 5 seconds. If you watch movies, I'm sure you guys do, you'll see like each camera move is very subtle, unless you get something where it's like an epic kind of camera shot where they do all of this kind of stuff. They typically just have slow camera movements. It's going from left to right. So if you've had video class before, that's what you want to kind of emulate, is what you would do with a traditional camera. With a regular camera, there's no way that I would do exactly this move. Now, if you want to get rid of keyframes, you'll see inside the timeline, whatever you have selected, you get a little icon. So right where here it says 50, there's a little purple icon. If I click on that, I can just hit delete, and it'll delete that keyframe. Here's another purple icon I want to get rid of. I can just delete, and it'll get rid of that keyframe as well. Sweet. Nice and smooth. That's all we want. Yes, sir?
So how do we actually...
All right, so let's say that we're ready. We're ready to render, okay? All my stuff is nicely named. Not this. What is that? That's my chair. Why didn't I label my chair? All my materials are nicely labeled down here. All my stuff is nicely on layers. It's not yet, but I will put it on layers real quick. So it's going on my accessory layer. Remember, if stuff is inside of a group, that it doesn't automatically get onto a layer. Okay? So I put my picture frames on layers, but if I toggle the eyeball off, they're still there, okay? The group itself is on a layer, but not the stuff underneath it. So I have to just click and drag on this layer icon for each one of these so that each one of those get that same label. All right, so that's that. Picture frame's good. Oops, I missed one. You don't need to do this step before you render. You can actually do it while it's rendering, but I just want to have it all set up. Not that. Okay. And then I usually will have a separate layer for all of my lights and cameras. Cone, we'll get that one. Okay, so don't worry about if you don't have all of them labeled. As it's rendering, you can actually go through and tidy up all your stuff.
You don't have to have the whole thing labeled?
For the turn-in you do, but not before we render. Okay, so while it's rendering, that process may take like 45 minutes. So while it's going, you can just jump back into Cinema and just rename all your stuff. I'm doing it just so you can see that we want to make sure we do that. So we have to go to render settings. So under the render, sculpt, and motion tracker menus, there's these little clapper icons, and one of them has a gear. So click the one with the gear, or the shortcut is Control B. Control B.
Double clicking?
Just single click it.
And then that's render settings.
Yep, this is render settings. So like when you're working in Photoshop or Illustrator or InDesign, the first thing that it asks you is what size are you going to be creating this document? In here, that's like the last thing that it's going to ask us, because we can build an entire world, and then depending on where we want to send it, we could choose a different resolution and it'll figure out what it's supposed to look like, okay? So right now this is set to 1280 by 720. On your cheat sheet thing or your turn-in, what is our rendering size?
960 by 540.
Yep, so we're going to set our resolution to 960 by 540. Okay, and then scrolling all the way down here, we're going to go to frame range, and we want to render all of our frames. Okay, so we just choose from frame range, all frames. And that means render frame 0 all the way to 150. So Control B or this little gear right there. When we render this out, like we've been hitting Shift R, that renders one frame. So what Cinema is going to do is it's going to go to frame 0 and render that out and save it. Then go to frame 1, render that out and save it. Go to frame 2, render that out and save it. So it'll do that for every single frame all the way to 150. Cool. That should all be set in this window. Let's go to the save. And this is what it's going to save and where it's going to save our files. Okay. So we are going to click the little dots next to file. And we're going to put this inside of our P drive. Yep.
Where is that? Oh, the local disk?
Yeah, the local P drive, the one you're saving your files to.
Okay.
And we're going to save it into the renders folder. Okay, and then it's going to want a name. So call it your last name underscore Miniroom. Okay, so it's going to go inside your P drive, Winder18, 2510, Miniroom, renders folder. Call it your last name underscore Miniroom. If you put your last name on everything, it's easier to find. If you don't, it's harder to find if you lose it. The format is what kind of files we're going to get out of Cinema. So we could have OpenEXR, which is a popular format. We could have PNGs, we could have TIFFs, we could have JPEGs, we could have IFFs, HDRs, whatever. For this one, a TIFF is going to be sufficient. Okay, it'll give us enough resolution that we won't or enough quality that we won't lose any detail. If we went to JPEG, sometimes those images can actually like be downgraded because of how JPEGs get saved. So we'll save it as a TIFF. 8 bits per channel is fine. Where it says name, this is how the files are going to come out, okay? So how many files are we going to have when we are done with this render? We're going to have 151. Every single frame is a separate file, okay? So Cinema has to know, how do we organize that? How am I supposed to name it? Now, Cinema doesn't care. It'll name it however we want. Where we're taking it does care. So we're going to take this into After Effects to actually make it into a QuickTime movie. So After Effects wants the very bottom one, which is name.number.extension. So name.number.extension. And what this will do is that when it renders out frame 50, it'll call it sarcona_miniroom.0050.tiff. Okay? When we bring it into After Effects reads that number so it knows what frame is what file. Okay? So it just makes it easier for After Effects. If you choose one of the other ones and After Effects doesn't recognize it because you chose the wrong one, you have 2 options. One of them is you re-render it with the correct one. The other one is you go through and you rename each one. So whichever one you want to do, if you screw up, that's up to you. Alpha channel, we don't need it on this one, but we will in other files. That's fine. One of the good things about Cinema 4D is that it is really ingrained inside of After Effects too. So you can actually take this Cinema 4D file and you could render it out, and then you could also bring part of this into After Effects. So let's say that I wanted to, let's say this is a room that I built. There's a million different things around here, and I want to call out certain ones with text. I don't want to do it inside Cinema, let's say, because I may want the text to change or the colors to change. I can export this out of Cinema, bring it in After Effects, and then I can actually like have After Effects know, like, here's where the desk is. I want to have a call out there for the desk, and then the monkey picture, and then my bookcase, and then something else. If you've seen those commercials where they do like a sweep and you see like all the prices and stuff adding up or popping up in there, very similar to what they would do with this. Okay? So we don't need it for this project, but for future ones we may. We're not doing anything with multipass, so ignore that. The next one is anti-aliasing. So let me go to, closed everything. Why did I close everything? So you probably have heard the term anti-aliasing before or seen like in Photoshop, there's an AA, that's not Alcoholics Anonymous, it's anti-aliasing.
I kind of figured that.
Yeah. So this is what anti-aliasing is. So the software knows, here's where my geometry is, here's where nothing is. So it could draw a solid line right there. But what happens is, because we have pixels, we would get this like stair-stepping thing, which looks pretty horrible, okay? It's basically like really chunky pixels and then nothing. So what anti-aliasing does is it blends the background with the item. So this transition right here, that's anti-aliasing. Depending on the kind of surfaces that you have, those settings may have to be cranked up really high, or they can be kind of low, okay? So for this one, we're going to keep it simple. There's a cubic, which is still image. We have an animation, so we're going to go to gauze animation. Okay, and then right here under anti-aliasing filter. And then at the very top, we're going to go to geometry and say best. Okay, so this is the best anti-aliasing settings. We can crank this up even further, but we don't want to do that. But for now, we're good. 1 by 1, 4 by 4 is good. Just so you can see the other options, there's a whole bunch of other stuff that we can set up inside here. You can even tell certain objects not to cast shadows or certain objects not to render but still be in reflections if you wanted to. Okay, there's a whole bunch of stuff you can really get down to the specifics of everything. Stereoscopic, if you wanted to render your stuff out so you had 3D glasses and you could like look at it in 3D, you can do that too. Team render is if you had a group of computers that are rendering your stuff. So this one is only going to take us at most an hour. some stuff may take overnight. Like this thing here that I rendered, this took like 5 hours to render. If I had a system of computers set up, all the computers would be using their processing power and it might get done in 20 minutes, okay? We don't have that set up, so it doesn't matter. Material override, we don't need to worry about either, but it's there for future stuff if we decide to. You don't have to do anything with the effect, but I want you to see that there's a whole bunch of other stuff we can even add on top of this. So things like depth of field, you could add. Things like global illumination, which is the bounce light, you could add. Lens effects, you can add. Sketch and tune, you could add. Not to this one, but to other ones you could, okay? So there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you could add even on top of this. If you are worried about your stuff, you can render out watermarks, so there's a watermark on every one of your files, which is, I guess, neat. There's also something called multipassing, which is basically, remember when we set up our materials, we set up a color and a reflection on our materials, okay? I could render it out so that the color and reflection get separated, and then I could push those back together inside of After Effects. The purpose of that is, let's say my reflections are too bright, I could pull the reflections down afterwards, okay? Or you can use them for other stuff like glows or whatever, all right? So there's other stuff down here too that we could also play with. You could also save your settings. In the classroom, it doesn't matter because we're not going to be doing it too much. All right, so the only thing we changed on here was 960 by 540. We set our stuff to all frames. We changed where we're saving it and the name of the file type. 1 second. And we went to anti-aliasing and chose best and Gaussian. Those are the only 3 tabs that we changed. So if you forget what they are, after you're done rendering or after you start rendering, you can jump open to this and write down each one of those things again, okay? That way you know, like, that's what should be changing. Yes, sir?
What was the width and height again?
What is the width and height? 960 by 540. Yep. Cool. All right, so now we're ready to actually render this out. Just with everything, there's always 2 different ways to do it. We're going to do the best way to do it, which is hitting, first saving our file, so hit Control S. And then hitting Shift R. Now it's important to mention too that as long as I'm in my camera when I hit Shift R, it will render that camera. If I'm in the wrong camera and hit Shift R, it renders whatever camera I'm in, okay? So if I were to have clicked that little white box and I jumped out of the camera, it's going to render whatever camera I'm in there. So what this is doing is it's rendering out each one of our files, and you can see it going through and chugging and doing its stuff. This is a good way to do this because you can see what the output is. Sometimes you're going to get some weird results. Sometimes you may render the wrong camera. Sometimes you may realize that your files aren't loading. So this is what you want to do. So right away you can see, okay, my pictures are there, so I know that's good. My lights are looking good still. This is looking good. Whatever. All of our frames are turning out over here. So if I click on any one of these frames and tap the space bar, it'll actually play that. Now because I only have 6 frames rendered, I get a little earthquake effect. Okay? Now while that's rendering, you can set that off to your other monitor if you want to, and you can go through and rename all your stuff. You can organize your stuff if you want, whatever, that doesn't matter. Any changes you do to this, like if I were to grab the chair and move it, that wouldn't affect the render view. I don't think it affects the render view. Let me see. Just shove my chair away over there and find out. It definitely shouldn't affect the render view. No, there's 10. Nope, it doesn't. Okay, just verifying. Yep. So cool. So you can move your stuff around and then do whatever, but it doesn't affect what's actually rendering. A good thing to note here too is the timestamp. So you may hate to do math, but do some math. So each frame of mine is taking 8 seconds. So how would I figure out how long this entire thing is going to take?
Multiply the average frame time by how many frames you're going to.
Yep. So we have 8 seconds a frame. I have 150 frames. So it'll take me 1,200 seconds. If I divide that by 60, because there's 60 seconds in a minute, it gives me 20 minutes, right? If I divide that by 60 again, it'll give me hours, 0.333 hours. That doesn't sound right, right? 20 minutes is 0.3 hours? 0.3? It's a third of an hour, right. I don't know. Oh, yeah, that's right, 3.3. I'm thinking of something. Never mind. We're good. Okay. Yep, so you can figure out down to the minute how long it's going to take. Now you'll see, as I start screwing around with my scene, that it is taking, in some cases, a little bit longer. So 8 seconds a frame is a pretty good estimate as to how long that's going to take. Some of your stuff, if I go to my P drive, 2540, mech animation, images. All right, so here's an animation that we did in the animation class. So this is a mech animation. So this is kind of like a Game of Thrones. It's like building itself. Woo, fun. Okay, so this one here, if I look at my timestamps, you can see that this is 556, 556, 556, 556. So basically I'm getting about 4 frames a minute out of here. 557 is actually a pretty good one. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Okay, so that's still pretty good. But some of these will take a long time to render. At the beginning of this, it went pretty quick because there's nothing in the scene. As it gets on and on and on, and I have more stuff inside the scene, it's going to take longer. So by the very end of this, if I scroll all the way down, you'll see I'm down to like 3 frames a minute, which is still not bad for this kind of animation. In this class that we do this stuff, some of our animations will literally take all night long to render. Some of them will take several days to render if you add a whole bunch of other stuff.
How many frames is that?
This one is 240. The one that I rendered out onto this is 900 frames. And the reason it's 900 is because I wanted to be able to slow it down in After Effects. So I want to control, like, this is fast, this is slow, this is fast, this is slow. I could do it in Cinema, but it's easier in After Effects if I have everything lined up. So let's see how long that one took. All right, so this one took, at the start of this, we got about 4 frames a minute. And you can see, when you are in 3D or you're doing this kind of stuff, bedtime is the best time to render. So typically, I set something up right before I go to bed, and then boom, it's ready. So this was set up last night around 10:40. I started it again. And then it finished around 11:50. So that's not too horrible. But I've had stuff that, like I said, takes all night long.
So if I don't want this one, can I just stop it?
Yep, if you want to cancel it, you can hit this cancel button right there. No. Oh, right here, there it is. So you can hit stop rendering, and it'll stop the rendering, do whatever you want to do, and then hit Shift-R again, and it'll pick it back up. Okay? Now, because we're hitting Shift-R to render our stuff, if I'm tweaking textures in here, I don't want to hit Shift-R because it'll just start my rendering over again. Okay? So let's say that I do, just so we can, I'm not going to ruin, I'll just minimize this. Okay, so let's say that I want to tweak one of my materials. So I go to my stuff and I make sure it's unlocked. There it is. I want to make this like really reflective. Perfect. Okay, so if I hit Shift-R right now, what's going to happen is it's going to start my whole rendering over again. I may just want to see what does this look like at this frame. So if you hit Control-R, that will render it right inside your view. Okay, so it's not rendering the whole animation, it's just rendering that one frame right where we're looking at it. So then we can see, yeah, that looks horrible, I'm going to go back to where it looked like before, or, you know, progress on. You could also go to interactive render region, which is Alt-R. Cinema does have this nice thing where Shift, Control, and Alt all do these things. Alt-R lets me put a box in an area, and now whatever happens inside this box changes. So if I go to that material and I say, let me see what the reflection looks like less, it'll automatically re-render that region out. I don't have to hit Alt-R. I don't have to look at this or that stuff or anything. It'll just do that one area. Yes, sir? Yes, it'll render them out as TIFFs. Your cinema file is a C4D file. All your renderings are TIFF files. All right. All right, so this is After Effects. Anytime we render something out of Cinema, we need to take it into another software, typically to process it. If we rendered out a still, we could take it into Photoshop and we could do some color corrections and tweaking and whatever else. For a animation, we need to go into After Effects and take all those frames and make it into one file into a movie. So has anyone here not used After Effects before? That's right, usually you have, yes. Okay. So the interface for what we're going to, what's that?
Do we click new project?
Nope, not yet. You'll see. So if there's a window popped up, you can close that window that popped up. The interface for this that we're going to use is very simple. We're basically bringing in files, making it into a movie, and then getting it out of there, okay? There's 1,000 trillion things more you can do inside of After Effects once you have stuff, but we're not going to be doing that, especially for the beginning stuff. So over here on the left, this is your project area. So we want to bring our footage into it. So if you just double click inside that area, that brings up your file browser, and then all you have to do is find your files. Okay, so find your files. Don't double click anything yet. Just find your files.
On which folder? The P folder?
Well, we're in After Effects.
Oh. After Effects.
Yep. And you're just double clicking right here. Yeah, close that window that popped up.
What window?
Okay, so After Effects allows you to import a single frame, so I could bring in just one of my frames, or I could bring in the entire sequence of frames. So what do you think we want to do? The whole thing, right? We want to grab all of our frames. Now, we don't grab all of the frames here because After Effects is smart. It knows that if we click on one of these, it recognizes it as a sequence. So if you look right there, it says TIFF sequence. So that way it knows that this is a TIFF sequence. Had we labeled this the wrong way and did name number dot extension, After Effects may not read name number dot extension. It needs that that first dot to say this is the frames that I'm at. Okay. Even labeling your files, like as let's say I drew a picture in Photoshop and I called it version 1, version 2, version 3. After Effects will sometimes read that as a sequence, and so I may want to specify, this is not a sequence. So I click on any one, don't grab all of them, any one, and we're going to try this too. This is a brand new button. I don't remember seeing this before. Create composition, and hit import.
Yeah, my thing's still going on.
That's fine.
Cinema. We're
Yep.
currently at 51.
When it's done, you'll just do the same process, okay? Regardless if you have 1,000,000 frames or 60, it'll be the same thing. Okay, so this saves us a step of having to create the composition. Typically, we would have to create it, just so you can see in case you have a different version at home. I bring in my footage without clicking that. And what it does is it brings it in right here, and then I would just drag it down into this area, and that would create a composition. Okay, so it saves us one step.
So drag when it says composition, drag it down.
No, you already have the composition, so you're good. I'm saying if you went to a different version of After Effects, it didn't have that. So if you hit the space bar on your computer or your keyboard, you should see the animation playing through. Now, if you don't have all your frames, like Matt doesn't have all his frames yet, it'll stop at the end. You may even see like a black frame inside there because that frame doesn't exist. Sweet. Yes, sir. Let's hope not. All right, so there's our animation. So our animation is done as far as that. If there was a problem, our light looked horrible, we had a glitch, something happened, we would jump back to Cinema, fix the glitch, render it out again, jump back to After Effects. That's why it's so important that we kind of keep an eye on our renders as they're going. Some companies actually have someone's job is just to watch people's renders, not frame by frame, but just every once in a while they pop open a frame, make sure everything looks good, close it down, go to someone else's files, open them up. Like that's a job at some places. So cool, that worked perfectly. So now we need to take this and make it into an actual movie. So we go under File, we go under Export.
Hold it. I have to write notes because this thing is taking forever.
Yep. So go to File, go to Export.
File, export.
And we're going to add this to the render queue. Okay, not the top one, we're the regular Add to Render queue. Now, if you are a video editor, you can see here too, you can also export this to Premiere, which is awesome because let's say that I created an animation and I want to put this together in a movie that I'm using, I can export it and drop it right in Premiere. You'll also see that there's a Maya Cinema 4D exporter. We can export this right to Cinema. So we're just going to do add to render queue. Okay, this part confuses everyone, so don't worry about it. These blue things here are links, just like a website, okay? So click on the word lossless. Lossless. I missed it. Try it again. Okay? So what this is going to do is we have all of these files. What do we want to make from these files? We could make an AVI file. You guys have heard of AVIs before? Yeah. Okay. We can make an MOV file. You've heard of that before? We can make an MP4. We could make a whatever, an animated GIF if we wanted to. Okay. So under this format options, we're going to choose QuickTime. We're choosing the one that in this area, in the graphic and commercial art area, media communication art area, is most widely used. QuickTime is most widely used. There are some places that will use AVIs, there are some places that will use animated GIFs, there are some places that will use random ones. But for what we're doing, QuickTime is going to be the best bet for all your stuff. Yes, sir?
I just finished up.
It did finish? All right, so we want a QuickTime file out of here. Now, QuickTime itself has inside of it different ways that it can compress this. Just so you can see it, if I didn't close it. 2510 is our class. Miniroom, renders. Okay, so there's all my renders. So just so you can see the size of this, my renders are 226 megabytes of raw files. Those are all my TIFFs together, okay? So in order to make an actual movie, QuickTime has to figure out how do we make this into something that is smaller that is obviously visible. 5 seconds at 220 megabytes is not feasible. So underneath the format options, there is a thing called video codecs. Every one of these is a different way for After Effects to take all of our sequences, put them into a QuickTime, and then make it smaller, ideally. Okay? So we want to use H.264. Now, if you remember from, I don't know when it was, a week ago, a week and a half ago, I passed out smaller versions of these cards. On the bottom of this card, it says QuickTime format H.264, and then it also has the audio compression if we had audio. Okay? So remember you have that too. You can also, like I tell people, take a snapshot with your phone. That way you have it, write it down, tattoo it on your arm, whatever helps. H.264. If you're working at home and you're rendering this in After Effects, you will not see QuickTime H.264 most likely unless you have QuickTime installed on your computer. Okay, if you have a Mac, it's default. On a PC, it's not default. You have to install QuickTime, and then you'll get the QuickTime option, and then you'll get the H.264 option. Okay? So QuickTime, H.264, we hit OK. We don't have anything else we need to worry about here, so we hit OK again. And now we're going to go down to where it says Output 2 and click that little button. Click your name. And then this is where we're going to save our file and what we're going to call it. So this will go into the final folder because this is our final item. And you will call it your last name underscore whatever the project is, in this case, Miniroom. So Sarcona underscore Miniroom. Okay. Once you're done with that, we hit render.
And that renders a whole lot quicker.
It does, because all the work is pretty much done. All it's doing is just taking those and putting them into one single file. Now, 226 megabytes is how big all my sequences were. When I go into my final folder and I look at this movie, the file size for this, I have my mouse over, you can't see it, is 20.9 megabytes. So it subtracted like 206 megabytes. Okay. If you double click it now, it should open up. It'll open up in either DJV, most likely on these computers, or QuickTime or VLC. If you don't have VLC installed in your computer, I definitely recommend it. It's an awesome player. It plays pretty much everything. And then that would be it. Okay? So let me show that process again without all the descriptions. This is all you have to do. Import your file. You can create the composition. And then you go to File, Export, Add to Render Queue. Click Lossless to choose QuickTime. Click Format Options, make sure H.264 is there. Click on Output 2, put it in the right folder, and then render. That's how quick that process is. So for most of our assignments, that's exactly what we're going to be doing, is just jumping into After Effects and doing those steps again and again and again, okay? So now that we have that, if I look at my cinema file, well, let me look at my assignment sheet first, okay? Because we always want to look at this because this is going to be what we're going to be turning in and whatever. So mini room due today, understanding the basics of cinema by creating a room with low resolution props. We're doing that. Simple 3D modeling, bookcase, chair, desk, and 3 other items. We have that. Basic 3D materials, some with textures, some with color only. I have that. Basic 3D lighting. We have that. Smooth rendered camera animation. I have that. Organized folder structure, scene, and layers. So let me double check. So my folders, here's my mini room. My textures are inside my textures folder. My scenes are inside my scenes folder. My renders are inside my renders folder. My reference, I don't have anything. And my final is inside my final folder. So all of those are organized. Let me check my cinema file. All of these are organized here. All of my layers are nicely labeled. All of my materials are also nicely labeled. So I'm good. I can save this. I can close my cinema. And then I am ready to turn it in. For this class, you have a Z drive on your computer. On the Z drive is a 2510 folder. There's a Monday, Wednesday Sarcona, which is my name. And there will be a mini room turn-in folder in there. What you're going to do is just drop your mini room folder right inside the turn-in folder. Now this doesn't let you delete anything, so you can't go in here and say, oh, I forgot to put this in or that in and start deleting things. You would just have to drop those files in or make a number 2 folder and drop that into it, okay? So before you leave today, make sure you have that dropped in, and then your assignment submission form, turn that in too. That tells me I'm ready to get my stuff graded. Cool? That's going to be the process for all of our stuff. Yes, sir?
I just need a little bit of help before I get this running.
Okay. All right, any questions on the rest of that?
So we just close out everything after we...
After you've checked everything and everything's good, yep, close out of everything, and then you can just upload your file. Yes, sir?